Have you ever seen such sorcery as this? Where a magazine image can just be pulled right off the magazine and left on this floppy thing?
Hi, I'm Jessica Russo Scherr, and I am an art teacher and an artist, and I'm going to be teaching you this incredible printmaking method used with image transfers and a gelatin plate. A printmaking technique that is both incredibly satisfying and equally frustrating.
I will not only go over the things that you should do, but I will show you all the things that I did wrong when I was learning this process. And trust me, there was a lot of things I did wrong. I'll also teach you how to cure your plate, clean your plate, and talk about some copyright issues that might be necessary for collage and image transfer artists. In addition, I will give my recommendations on what supplies you should use according to my experience. Before I get into the step-by-step, let me just give you an overview if you've never seen this process before. You apply acrylic paint onto a gel plate, then you apply your magazine image on top of it, and that removes some of the acrylic paint from the areas that are not printed on. And the image stays on the gel plate, hopefully. And then you apply a transfer layer, which has acrylic paint all over it, and you put a like Bristol board or some smooth paper on top of it and let it sit and dry for like 20-30 minutes. Then you peel it off and all of a sudden you have magic. But sometimes it's not quite so easy. So I'm going to start off this video talking about the mistakes I made, and then I will go into a more detailed version of how to do it right. But first, these are my supply recommendations.
High quality magazine images, preferably from a magazine like Vogue, because the way they print their magazines just seem to work better.
However, you have to choose other magazines if you want different content, and you can experiment with them to see if they would work as well.
Now, the gel plates that you can use come in all different sizes and shapes. There are ones from this brand, the jelly plate one. There are ones that are by Speedball, that they seem to be a little bit thinner. This one is also by the jelly plate. It comes in a package, and then it has this very satisfying peeling thing on. It's much better if you keep them in the container. Other materials you will need is some Bristol board, some very smooth paper seems to work best for me. Brayer, otherwise known as a rolly thing, but should be called a brayer. You'll need some acrylic paint. It's best if it's a good quality brand. I've been having success with things like Amsterdam and Liquitex as well. You could also use some masking tape or painter's tape. You should have some baby oil around or something, and that's to help season the plate.
When I started this process, I watched a few videos and I was like, oh, I could do this. Well, I was wrong. Here are the first jelly plate magazine image transfers that I ever did. And there was definitely a learning curve. And these were my best of the trials. And what I'm trying to say is that you need to forgive yourself because it is going to be a process. And there's going to be a lot of experimentation. Okay, let's get into it. These are the mistakes I made in the beginning. I was using decent acrylic paint and I was rolling it off onto when I first started off, my Speedball gel plates. And this was working out all right, except I think I had, sometimes I used uneven amounts of paint on the gel plates. You want to have this coat to be quite thin and very even. I also think I was working too slow and letting it dry. Then when I went to put my magazine image down, I chose a decent one and I put it down on and I let it sit for too long. In fact, I was trying to let the paint dry on the plate. And that was a huge, huge mistake. You want to do this layer incredibly fast. I was so lost in the initial stages of this, I just kind of went in blindly, and I even pulled out a hair dryer to make the paint dry faster, which was a huge mistake for this layer. For the transfer image layer, you need the acrylic paint to be wet. For this next one, I got the image transfer and I loved it. I thought the look and the expression on this woman was incredible. I did pull it up a little bit faster. You can see the paint is still wet. And I was quite happy, and then I started going in, touching up, cleaning up some of the acrylic paint that was left so I can have more contrast on my image. I used a wet paintbrush and a paper towel at this point, but I found since then if you use a baby wipe and masking tape, that works quite well. The problems with this one came in this next stage. I put on acrylic paint and I rolled it out with the brayer. Actually, in this case, I made two mistakes. One is I didn't make this coat thick enough and wet enough because your transfer layer, the last layer you do, needs to be wet enough to attach to your final paper. The second mistake I made is that I used a durable mixed media type paper, which I thought was going to be great, but it turns out it was just really absorbent and it had a slight texture to it. So I didn't have enough paint to fully attach to it, and this paper was not the right choice for it. I suggest Bristol board because it is very smooth, but it's still durable enough. Now this print was equally painful for me because I also tore my jelly plate on this one trying to get the paper off. You can see it right here. It's coming up. And I was just crushed. And I think that's because of two reasons. One, I really screwed up this layer. Oh, there's the tear. And the second is the speedball plate is a little bit thinner and a little bit stickier than the jelly plate. So I have had less issues with my mistakes sticking in this sort of incontrollable manner with the speedball plate. Perhaps the speedball plate is better for other types of gel printing. And there's so many different things you could do with this. Love speedball, but it didn't work out for me for this plate. Other problems I had was using drawing paper because it was also too absorbent, and then pulling up this layer before that layer of acrylic paint was fully dry. The transfer layer has to be 100% dry before you pull it up. And here I am trying to pull it up before it's fully dry. I can see it's still sticking to the plate, and I'm just keep on going like, hey, you know, this will work out. Spoiler alert, it did not work out at all. Now here's what I found works really well. When you first get your jelly plate, it will be covered in this sort of plastic acetate sheets. At first I was storing mine with those, but I don't think you need to. I would keep it in the box that it came in though, because that'll help protect it as you use it. I would suggest washing it with dish soap a few times to remove any film or residue off of it. Apply acrylic paint to your seasoned gel plate and then roll it out with the brayer. You want this coat to be thin enough that you can almost see through it. I'm using a Payne's gray, but you could use black, or you can really use any color for this, but traditionally people use a darker color or a black. What you can't see is that off camera, I am actually taking my brayer and I am rolling it off on a scrap piece of paper to get the extra paint off of the brayer because I put too much on my gel plate. I chose a high contrast image from Vogue. I put it down as smooth as I could on top of the acrylic paint, and then I used the brayer to go over it. The perk of this is that it also cleans off your brayer a little bit, which is really quite nice. You don't have to rub on it too much. Actually, I am probably over pressing. You just need to do quick roll over. And immediately you want to lift the magazine off. What happens is, I believe the magazine is printed with some sort of oil-based ink, and it repels the acrylic paint, so the acrylic paint does not attach to the magazine and it's left on the jelly plate. but every place there isn't toner on the magazine or whatever the printer ink, it sticks to the magazine paper. Little bits and pieces get stuck on the gel plate, you can just peel it off. This was probably my first sort of successful gel print pull with magazines. I did many of them where I just screamed and cried and was very frustrated. Nearly threw my gel plate across the room. And I actually posted a video on TikTok of me doing this print, and it kind of blew up a little bit, and so many people on the internet, on TikTok and on Instagram really came out and just gave me so much advice. So I want to say I would not be here giving this video and demonstrating and being able to teach my students how to do this if it wasn't for all of those people. And I'll do my best to tag some of them in the comments below, the best that I can. But I must say, like, there were so many comments, I can't possibly tag everyone. But thank you. So I cleaned up a little bit of the extra stuff on it, and then once the acrylic paint is fully dry, I went in with some Liquitex Basics and I applied it all over the plate. You don't need a ton of acrylic paint on this layer, but you do need to have a nice coating because you need to work with this layer being wet when you apply your Bristol board on top. So I just chose some bright colors that I thought would contrast well with the silhouettes of the figures, and I rolled over them with the brayer. I added some golden fluid acrylics on top to add a little bit more acrylic paint to give a nice solid coating over it. So what'll happen is the acrylic paint, when I put the paper, the Bristol board down on top of it, the acrylic paint will release from the gel plate and attach itself to the Bristol board. But it'll only do that with wet acrylic paint. So you have to make sure this layer is wet enough and you don't let it sit and dry. When you put your paper on, you want to press down and smooth it out as best as possible. Some people say you don't need to weight down the prints, but I like to weight them down.
Now, I don't wet the paper first. I tried that. Some people said, oh, you have to wet the paper because, you know, in printmaking, we wet the paper all the time. For monotypes, we wet the paper. But for this, I found if I wet the paper, it was tearing too much. And I've been having more success with dry Bristol board.
So I let it sit, waited for about 20 to 30 minutes. I'll take off the books and then I'll test to see if it's dry enough. If not, I'll just let it sit without the books on it until it's ready to be peeled off of the gel plate. Now, I found the speedball plates to be a little extra sticky and a little harder to pull the print off of, but you will get some resistance even no matter what you're using. So the finished product, you can see I have, it's not perfect, but it's kind of interesting. This one I wanted to put some paint on paper first and then see if I can do an image transfer onto the painted paper. So I just took a brayer and some acrylic paint and rolled it out as my first step and then let that sit on the side to dry. And then I just followed through the same steps for doing the image transfer. What was really successful about this piece is that I had a very thin layer for the first coat of black to do the image transfer, and that made the overall transfer very good. I used a hair dryer to speed up the drying process. You should be careful you don't overdo this because that could break down your plate, but a little bit of hair drying doesn't hurt. Then mixed in my paints on a separate piece of scrap paper using some gel medium, white, and pink paint. Then I mixed in a little bit of blue and I used a brayer to go over it. So with the whole plate covered, I then added my painted on paper onto it and then I let it sit, weighted underneath my books. You can see when it's dry because it kind of curls up on the edge. This one I did on drawing paper because I was all out of Bristol. but it seemed to work all right because I think it was painted. So you can see the bluish color that I had on the other painting, and then the sort of pink and blue that I did behind it kind of all come through onto one thing. I was so happy, you can tell by my little dance. This one I also used very similar process, except I think I used way too much paint on the first layer, and I think you could see it as I'm trying to recover from squeezing out too much in the beginning. This one I also ended up pressing onto painted paper, which I think is a good substitute if you don't have Bristol around. It helps make the drawing paper a little less porous and gives perhaps a smoother texture to the paper. And although my image transfer layer was a little muddy in this one, I think overall I like the effect. I'm not sure I really like the scale of the smaller round jelly plates for image transfers because they're quite small, and if the image doesn't fully transfer, it's not so great. So I wanted to use them to create one artwork with several prints. Some of the mistakes I made is that you can see the paint is pulling off of the plate as I'm rolling it out. One, I don't think that the golden black fluid one that I'm using right now is a good choice. And it just, it just kept on pooling. You can see in the corners how it's just, okay, it's a circle. It doesn't have corners. But I didn't season the plate. I didn't wash it enough. I needed to wash it more with dish soap. Since I'm working so small, I thought it would be best to use faces since they are easily recognizable even if they're small. And since I was using magazines, there's tons of faces. It was, pretty easy to find, although most of them were, I don't know. I was using German Vogue, and a lot of the images, they were from German Vogue from like 15 years ago. And so there wasn't a lot of diversity in the images that I had, but there were also some striking ones that, like this one, that I think worked quite well given the fact that the paint was going away. Now I wanted to use bronze, like a metallic paint on top of that to see if that would create an interesting dynamic between the image transfer and the bronze. I applied multiple gel prints onto the same paper, and some of them were more successful than others, and here's my process. I might have used my chai tea to weight down some of my gel prints. I don't know how effective it was, but it made me happy. So after I pulled the last one, I looked at it and I can see they kind of look like a modern age interpretation of coins. I guess the bird, I'm not so happy about. The white and the bronze just did not work quite well, but I can see the potential for doing something there. And I went back in and I touched up areas where it just didn't transfer well. I think if I did this again and I had the plates properly seasoned, I think it would have worked a little bit better. I went through and painted the background, which I regret now, but here's that process. Remember, this is going to be an experimental process, and not all of your prints are going to come out successfully. Consider ways that you can work on your prints to make them successful. I had this one tear, and I worked on it, and I actually like the finished product much better than the original transfer. Now, if you create some prints in this process that aren't your favorite, think about ways that you could improve them, the ways that you can cut them up and collage them or rework them in some other way. This is an example. I really didn't care the way this one came out, and the image wasn't exactly my favorite. So I just started using some other paint that I had left around. And I applied it with a Post-it pack. Don't judge. Then I cut it up and I attached it onto another failed print. There are several ways to clean your plate. You can use baby wipes. I think baby oil is probably the best way to get really stuck on paint off of it. And it also helps so-called season your plates. You can also use soap and water and rinse it off as well. You could also apply a full layer of acrylic paint and just let another piece of paper attach on top of it, like a transfer layer, and then pull it up. And then you could always use that for a print in the future.
Now, I've gotten a lot of comments on my videos about copyright, since if you're using a magazine, is it copyright infringement? Well, there are some things to consider regarding that. Are you transforming the image enough? Are you selling the image? Usually, my suggestion is that you need to transform it a fair amount so it doesn't have its original context, the original purpose, and original meaning. If you're interested in learning a little bit more about the legalities and the copyrights about doing collage or using magazine images in your image transfer, here's the information. So I really hope you enjoyed this process and you have some success in making jelly plate printmaking. It is something that it can be quite experimental, and there's so many different things that you can do with the gelatin plate, not just image transfer.
This for you.